Hello, everyone. We will start in a few minutes. We'll just wait for everyone to come in. I'm going to promote Asenath as a panelist. Great. We'll let everyone come in. We'll start in 1 minute. Welcome, Asenath. Need to pin you. Okay, I think I will start and we'll just let people continue to come in. We have about 25 people in attendance right now. Bonjour tout le monde. Hello, my name is Gabrielle Lepage. I am the Climate Action Africa Communications Advisor, and I will provide a few little housekeeping information, and then I'll turn it over to Elise Paré, who will do our opening remarks. So first of all, this webinar is delivered in French and English. We have simultaneous interpretation. So if you need to use the interpretation, what I invite you to do is look at the globe icon in the meeting controls at the bottom of your screen. Select your language and in the channel that you want to listen to, either French or English. And you can hear the translation at a lower volume or in the original audio. So you can mute the original speaker and entirely focus on the translation if needed. So with that, I will turn it over to Elise Paré, who will give us our opening remarks.
Merci, Gabrielle. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Elise Paré, and I lead WSP Canada's national practice in climate risk and resilience. Pour débuter, j'aimerais faire la reconnaissance des territoires de peuples autochtones, le mécanisme de déploiement d'experts action climatique en Afrique reconnaît que nos équipes situées sur les terres connues aujourd'hui sous le nom de Canada sont les terres traditionnelles des Premières Nations, des Inuits et des Métis qui ont géré ces terres depuis des générations. Nous respectons et affirmons les droits inhérents et les droits issus de traités de tous les peuples autochtones de ce pays et nous nous engageons à marcher solidairement sur la voie d'une véritable réconciliation. Le projet Action climatique en Afrique s'engage à faire en sorte que ces équipes mènent leur programme d'une manière qui répond aux appels de la Déclaration des Nations Unies sur les droits des peuples autochtones. Nous commencerons avec l'honneur d'accueillir Gareth Phillips de la Banque africaine de développement en tant que conférencier principal. Ensuite, Christy McConnell, également de WSP, nous présentera les objectifs du webinaire et animera la discussion. Trois interventions passionnantes suivront. Denis Leclerc d'Ecotech et Québec nous parlera de la conception stratégique pour les organismes émergents de technologies propres en Afrique du Sud. Asenath, Kiprono et David Townsend d'Oxfam Consults partageront leur expérience en Tanzanie, vise à aider un développement d'énergie géothermique à faible émission. Et enfin, Lisa Feister de Samuel Hall nous apportera ses perspectives uniques d'un programme de résilience à la chaleur urbaine en Afrique axé sur le genre en Sierra Leone. Nous terminerons par une session interactive des questions-réponses avant le discours de clôture de Marco Heredia de l'Alinea International. Préparez-vous à une discussion riche et inspirante sur l'action climatique en Afrique.
Thank you very much. Shall I start?
Yes, please.
Yes, indeed. Sorry, I see my slide is up there. Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Gareth Phillips, and I'm the manager of climate and environmental finance at the African Development Bank. And it's a great pleasure to be here with you today to give a keynote introduction. I'm just back from the COP30 in Belém, so I'm going to give you some quick highlights of the negotiations and then talk a little bit about some of my own takeaways and the work that we're doing, which is also supported by Climate Action Africa through one of their projects. Well, you may have heard the mixed messages perhaps coming back from Belém. We got off to quite a fairly slow start. It was a bit disorganized, which is never a good sign. The buses didn't work very well. The pavilions were incredibly hot. The air conditioning wasn't very good, which makes you worried about the negotiations. But things did get into swing by about the third day, and things started to make a little bit of progress. We finished with some real drama on the Thursday. You may have heard there was a fire in one of the pavilions. It wasn't our pavilion; it was behind our pavilion. But any of the film coverage featured our pavilion prominently because that was the way you approached the fire. So if you saw the films or videos, you'll have seen the African pavilion front and center. But anyway, fortunately, nobody was injured. That's the most important thing. And it resulted in all of the pavilions being closed down a day early, and the negotiations carried on nonetheless. So we had some main outcomes. I'm just going to touch very briefly on those. Really, the top line was the outcome from the political mutirão, the huddle that the Brazilian presidency convened. And the major outcome, the major top line event from that was the tripling of adaptation finance, which in some ways was a big step forward, but others have observed that it's tripling from a fairly low base, and the timeline for achieving that was quite diluted. It's now pushed back to 2035, and when you look at the impact of inflation over that period of time, it becomes a little bit less, and there isn't a very clear baseline. So in some ways, whilst that was presented as a strong political outcome, it was a little bit weak, I think. Finance continued to dominate COP30. The main question coming from the developing countries was seeking commitment from developed countries on the NCQG, the new collective quantified goal. You may recall that was set last year in Baku at $300 billion by 2030, to the disappointment of a number of parties. And the developing countries wanted the developed countries to commit to meet that money from public finance. But the developed countries were not having any of it, and were resisting any kind of binding obligation. The other point really then to note around the climate finance is 300 billion by 2030, 1.3 trillion by 2035, against needs of $350 billion for adaptation by 2035, 5.3 trillion for NDCs by 2035. The main point is there is a huge gap between what is needed and the amount of money that is being made available. There was a lot of work around the adaptation indicators. I can't remember what we started. I think there were over 600 originally, and then it came down to 100 by the time we got to Belém, and that was further whittled down to 60. I think there was a bit of disappointment amongst some of the experts who'd been working on this program for 2 years. And I think there was a feeling that last minute intervention at the political level rather undermined the work that had been done on defining the adaptation indicators. So we're now left with 60, and we will continue to try to move forward with those as best we can. The Loss and Damage Fund is fully operational, but the scale is inadequate. I think they have about $750 million, and there was no agreement on a replenishment cycle, which was frustrating, particularly for the vulnerable countries, the African, Caribbean, and Pacific states that were concerned and sort of warned that this fund would become a charity fund if it didn't have a proper replenishment cycle. Good news for the Gender Action Plan, which I'm sure will be music to the ears of all our Canadian participants. This was adopted and now enshrines disaggregated data into all the monitoring and reporting requirements. So I think that was a positive outcome. Likewise, the National Adaptation Plan decision was adopted after 2 years of discussion, but it fails to provide a clear strategy to scale, support, integrate climate information, or ensure coherence with biodiversity planning. So some shortfalls there. One of the major disappointments was the loss of fossil fuel. The final decision does not refer to fossil fuels. Obviously, there were some geopolitical power plays coming into effect there, and some countries in particular stepping in at the last minute to block the use of fossil fuels. The Brazilian presidency was very focused on achieving consensus, and they knew that if they pressed ahead with fossil fuels, they wouldn't get consensus. So in the end, they gave up, but they did commit to pursuing the concept of fossil fuel roadmaps outside of the convention. But still, I think we see fossil fuels continuing to fragment the negotiations. Trade and unilateral measures came up. These are usually dealt with under the World Trade Organization, but it's important to be aware of these. It's really been led by the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which is being driven by the EU Emissions Trading Scheme. It's very technical. I won't go into it, but it's stirring up a lot of discontent amongst exporting countries. And the bottom line is that if you want to have an environmentally sound emissions trading scheme, then you need to have some form of border adjustment, because you can't let products into your market that don't meet the same standards. So these adjustments are going to become more significant in the future, and developing countries are concerned about those. Well, I think those are really the main messages that came sort of from the negotiations. You may have you can read about those points probably in the press, but I wanted also just to give you a couple of my own takeaways from what I saw there. I've been attending the COP for since about 2000, since COP 6. This was in some ways no different. It wasn't as well organized. It was hotter. It was a lot more expensive than anything we've been to in the past, which is worrying because it makes the COP less inclusive. And that's not good. I hope that some lessons have been learned to take forward. But in the COP, when you walked around passing the pavilions, all I heard about was adaptation finance. Everybody was talking about adaptation finance, and there seemed to be a fair degree of acceptance that mitigation is making good progress. We know now that renewable energy technologies are cheaper to build, they're quicker to build, they're cleaner to build. We still have some issues with base load and the need for storage, but by and large, I think the tide is turning, and we know the statistics show that more renewable energy was built, although that's very heavily weighed by China's investment. But nonetheless, I think also when you consider that you can't buy a gas turbine now, it's got a 7-year lead time, and you're competing with the likes of Google, Meta, and Facebook because they're buying them all for their data centers. So I think in many countries, fossil fuels are being squeezed out, and renewable energies are looking positive. So the focus was very much on adaptation finance. And the other message that I've really come away with was that there was wide-scale acknowledgement that the official development assistance model has broken. We know that it's the ODA funds that replenish the GEF, the GCF, the climate investment funds, the bilateral lending, and also in our case, the Africa Development Fund and the IDF for the World Bank and so on. Those amounts of money are going down because money is being redirected elsewhere. And I mentioned earlier the gap between the amount of money that is being mobilized and the amount that we need. So each year through the multilateral funds, we're mobilizing tens of billions of dollars, but we need multiples of hundreds of billions. So we're an order of magnitude plus out, away from what we need to mobilize. And I don't see the situation getting any better. And so for me, the hope is around Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. Some of you may be familiar with that. It includes the market and the non-market approaches. The market approaches, of course, are the carbon markets. I see those as being terribly complicated, full of risk. We've spent 10 years trying to develop rules for them, and they're not really catching on. Those of you who were working in this space during the Kyoto Protocol, the Clean Development Mechanism, its life cycle was 10 years. And it achieved a huge amount. Okay, there were problems, but we're 10 years into Article 6.2 and 6.4, and we haven't really got off the ground yet. So I'm very concerned about Article 6.2 and 6.4, but I think there is great hope for the non-market approaches. It's very much the poor sister of Article 6. I mean, who expects that with a name like non-market approaches, who's going to be interested in it? But actually, I think it is a very, very powerful instrument. And one of the main reasons that it holds great potential is that it doesn't contain a profit-making element, which is not something that people necessarily like to hear. But it means that if you buy an asset under Article 6.8, all the money that you pay goes to the project. Unlike in the carbon markets, where if you buy a mitigation outcome or a voluntary emission reduction, actually you have no idea how much money goes to the project and how much goes to the financier or the investment bank that is aggregating and selling those units on. And I think that's a very powerful argument to raise interest in Article 6.8. At the African Development Bank, we are piloting the adaptation benefits mechanism, which is the main instrument under Article 6.8. There are a couple of others, but they're not really very fully fledged. The ABM is quite flexible and is now operational. And we have some pilot projects. We generate certified adaptation benefits, and the sale of those certified adaptation benefits gives the adaptation project developer a cash flow, which enables them to go to the capital markets to borrow money, which is quite an innovation for adaptation projects. So I think that we talked extensively about the ABM at COP30. There was a lot of interest in it. I feel that we are close to turning a corner and finding real uptake for non-market approaches. And I hope that they will come to exist side by side with market approaches and maybe even contribute significantly to the mobilization of climate finance, particularly adaptation finance in the future. So I think with that, I will close my keynote speech and thank you for your attention. If anybody would like to know more about the ABM, you'll get my details, I think, from the mailing list. I'm happy to talk more about it. But with that, I'm going to hand back to Elise, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Gareth. It is always good to get the personal touch, hearing back from these important gatherings versus just reading the news. So I appreciate you sharing.
That's a pleasure.
So next, WSP is proud to partner with Alinea International in developing the Expert Deployment Mechanism Climate Action Africa Initiative, which is shortened to EDM-CAA, which supports climate mitigation and adaptation efforts across Sub-Saharan Africa. This collaboration combines Alinea's expertise in international development with WSP's technical leadership in climate risk and resilience. Christy McConnell serves as an urban climate resilience advisor with WSP, focusing on integrating climate adaptation strategies into urban planning and infrastructure projects. Christy will be guiding today's discussion as our moderator. And so I'll hand it off to you now, Christy.
Thank you, Elise. I am excited to be here today moderating this session on how Climate Action Africa has been supporting climate mitigation and adaptation in Sub-Saharan Africa. We have an excellent lineup of speakers ahead of us today who are going to share their experiences and insights. As you can see, there are 4 objectives for today's session. First is to underscore Africa's urgent need for climate action. Second is to showcase the technical support and partnerships that EDM-CAA has helped to foster. Third is to highlight the local impacts of global climate action. And finally, the session aims to demonstrate alignment of EDM-CAA's climate mitigation and adaptation efforts with global development goals. So in terms of the structure for today's session, there will be 3 presentations followed by a Q&A period. I'd like you to remind you to please submit your questions in the Q&A box throughout the presentations, and we'll address as many as we can once all the presentations are complete. Also, the chat box is available. If you encounter any technical issues or have general comments to share throughout today's session, feel free to use the chat box as you wish. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Denis Leclerc from Ecotech Québec. Denis will discuss clean tech initiatives under the mitigation pillar in South Africa. Denis, the floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Alors, ça me fait vraiment plaisir d'être avec vous. Je vais faire ma présentation en anglais parce que mes planches, mes slides sont en anglais. Alors, je pense que ça serait plus facile pour tout le monde si je le faisais en anglais, pardon. So I'll switch in English. Just said in French that it'll be easier since my slides are in English. So, next slide, please. So, this is exciting to share with you the results of this strategic projects. A great collaboration between Ecotech Québec. Ecotech Québec is the Québec Cleantech cluster, and Green Cape. Green Cape, the cluster located in South Africa, and that could transform or how we approach climate innovation in the Sub-Saharan Africa. We wanted to assist Green Cape to answer 2 big questions. How can we build effective clean tech clusters across the region? And how can we create an alliance that connects clean tech or these clusters and existed hubs to amplify their impact? Just want to mention that Ecotech has a very large experience in cluster. Ecotech is also the co-founder of Canada Clean Tech Alliance and co-founder of International Clean Tech Clusters, with a lot of links with other clusters around the world. Next. I don't want to go into the details about the review, but there's a critical paradox. Africa is very vulnerable to climate change, yet its contribution is very little to causing it. Next. So there's a massive opportunity here. The key is finding ways to address the situation, both by solving the two challenges. Next. We talked to people, a lot of them, to better understand the situation. Over 20 structured interviews, another dozen informal conversation, and with folks from international organizations, finance, government, philanthropic, local hubs. And you know what? The response was overwhelming. People across all these sectors want this to happen. They're ready for a collaborative approach because they understand that working together, it's the only way we're going to move the needle on climate innovation and sustainable development. Next. Just, what is a cluster? What is a clean tech cluster? What about the clean tech cluster agency? Pretty easy. Cluster, you're bringing people together. That's okay. But a clean tech cluster agency, take this further. It's a facilitator, the connector, the catalyst that helps everyone work together to scale clean technologies. I would like to say more climate technologies, climate innovation, to really move the needle to a better sustainable development. So here's the list. The report is pretty detailed report that we submitted over 100 pages. So I have only 10 minutes to summarize it. So this is all the sections under the Cleantech Cluster Agency, what we call the blueprint. I don't want to go over it, but there's a lot of information in the documentation. But what is important to understand is we wanted, as Gareth said, adaptation is also key. We used to see Cleantech clusters for only mitigation. Now we need to focus also on adaptation, and adaptation needs also innovation. So that's why those clusters need to focus on these two, mitigation and adaptation. We have identified key success factors that work, but they need to be adapted to local context, obviously. Cultural norms, stakeholders' expectation. It's important to understand that there's no cookie cutter approach here, but this is a buffet, like a buffet. So you pick and choose what is the best for the regions and the cultural norms. Same thing with next slide, please. We also review the core activities. What a cluster, what an agency is doing. They're there to support their members. They provide resources, create network, open market access. We look at successful model worldwide and adapted them to work in Sub-Saharan Africa context. So this is obviously, again, example of the type of activities a cluster can do. Next. And then we come up with a roadmap. Building these clusters, it's not magic. You need a structured process. You need to assess regional needs, get buy-in from multiple sectors, build solid governance, mobilize financing, foster the right ecosystem for innovation, etc., etc. So we've developed a very flexible phased roadmap that balance quick wins with long-term growth. But remember, local objectives, cultural context, and available resources will shape how fast you move and what you prioritize. So that's the end of the cluster blueprint. I still have 3 minutes to talk to you about an alliance. It's good to create some clusters, but how can we optimize the work of these clusters? But how can we also optimize the work of the current climate organization in Sub-Saharan Africa? So this is, the alliance is not about creating something that would compete with those local organizations. No, it's about enhancing existing initiative, amplifying African voices globally, and promoting collaboration across the region. Like Gareth was at the COP. So that would be a great moment to have a structured voice of Sub-Saharan Africa at the COP. Next, please. So I won't go to these aspects, but we did recommend the key objective indicators instead of key performance indicator. And you have here a list of those indicators. Again, it's important to repeat. The alliance acts as a force multiplier, not by taking control. Next, sorry. So challenges and risk, of course, it's complex, but we do have in the document strategies, inclusive governance with regional representation, phase implementation, and transparent communication about both successes and challenges. Next slide, please. Now, money is key, as you all know, but here again, it's important for those critical first 3 years. So it's important to align goals with things that matter to investors: economic resilience, job creation, climate adaptation, and mitigation, and the reverse, return on impact. So we have also a section about funding. The implementation, next slide, please. Implementation. So here again, this is only a snapshot of the implementation plan. We have outlined core activities, phase roadmap. These steps are important and are inspired by global best practices, and they're not rigid. Of course, the Alliance needs to tailor the approach to align with specific priorities, capacities, and cultural contexts across Sub-Saharan Africa. Flexibility is key. So we have recommended Green Cape with some next step, and this is only some of them, and because we want to ensure the long-term sustainability of this initiative. So, conclusion: building climate clusters and connected alliance across Sub-Saharan Africa isn't just good for the planet. It's a great opportunity for inclusive economic growth, community development, and environmental resilience. Every stakeholder we talk to agrees. This creates the foundation for sustainable prosperity that benefits everyone. Happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Denis, for your presentation. You did a great job at condensing a lot of really practical, actionable insights into a very short amount of time. So thank you for that. And I'll just remind participants at this time to please add any questions for Denis into the Q&A box. And next, we will hear from Oxfam Consultants and TownRock Energy Consulting on their geothermal project in Tanzania. So please join me in welcoming Asenath, Kiprono, and David Townsend.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. All right.
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Greetings from Nairobi. My name is Asenath, as you've heard, and I'm the Wash and Energy Portfolio Manager for Oxfam Consults. Oxfam Consults is contracted by Alinea under the Climate Action Africa initiative to implement a technical assistance to the Tanzania Geothermal Development Company, which is the project that you can see on this slide. Next slide, please. So the project is a response to the challenges that climate change is creating for energy access in Tanzania. Like many countries, Tanzania is facing declining water resources, which affects energy production, especially hydropower. And to address this, the government of Tanzania is exploring other renewable sources, such as geothermal energy. Geothermal energy is seen as both a climate mitigation and adaptation solution. It reduces carbon emissions and also provides a reliable power source that is not affected by droughts. So through this initiative, the technical assistance is supporting the government of Tanzania, working closely with the Tanzania Geothermal Development Company, TGDC, to explore the geothermal potential in the Meru region. And the technical assistance focuses on 3 main components. We are carrying out a detailed surface exploration study of the Meru region. Then secondly, we are training TGDC in geothermal resource assessment, planning and development. And lastly, we are building capacity of TGDC for environmental and social impact assessments and also supporting them in engaging in indigenous communities and indigenous peoples, local communities ahead of any future geothermal drilling plans. Next slide, please. So the technical assistance is being delivered by a consortium of 3 partners, Oxfam Consults as a lead, together with TownRock Energy and Aquarius Resources. And as mentioned earlier, the organization receiving this support is the Tanzania Geothermal Development Company. So at this point, I'll hand over to David to share more about the project.
Thank you, Asenath. I'm David Townsend, the CEO at TownRock Energy, geothermal energy specialist consultancy working on projects all around the world. Geothermal energy can provide baseload renewable energy, which I'm glad was highlighted as still one of the key issues around mitigation of carbon emissions. And actually, geothermal technologies are being developed to assist with storage of intermittent solar, wind, or other renewable energy sources as well. So it's a really important piece of the puzzle for any country that is seeking to become more resilient whilst removing fossil fuels and other carbon emission sources from their energy mix. So why was Meru selected by the TGDC for this particular technical assistance? Well, it's marked here in this small black box. The Mount Meru is near to Kilimanjaro, and it sits on one of the major faults as part of the East Africa Rift system. The East Africa Rift is a very prevalent source of geothermal energy in Kenya, just across the border. Kenya has managed to develop enough electricity to meet 40% of their national demand, and it continues to grow. Meru is a volcano, and so therefore has several indications that there could be a good geothermal resource beneath it and associated with it. And Arusha, Tanzania's 3rd largest city, is adjacent to Meru and does require a more reliable electricity supply. There's also a lot of tourism in the area, and there are co-benefits of geothermal power production whereby heat can be used for tourism such as spas and baths. Next slide, please. So I unfortunately won't go into all of the technical detail of our study, but the highlights are that we're integrating all the existing data sets, whether they're satellite data sets or past field campaigns by academic researchers. We're aggregating those into a very large GIS-based data set. We then used that to inform a comprehensive field campaign in July, where a number of us were in the field searching for locations for new data collection to fill key gaps in our technical understanding of the model. Next slide, please. Capacity building is of course incredibly important. The TGDC have been excellent to work with and have a very strong thirst for learning, especially new techniques that they haven't deployed before in the field. We did 3 days of in-person workshops in Arusha at the start of the field campaign, covering geochemistry, geology, remote sensing, GIS skills, and a lot of the practical field skills that we then took a number of the TGDC into the field with us to accompany us and to support the field campaign for that month. We also have a number of online workshops as follow-ups. And today, Dr. Helen Robinson from Aquarius led the ESIA workshop and delivered that for TGDC, which is really important for all geothermal projects, but this one especially because the volcano also forms a critical nature preserve full of wildlife that needs to be considered with a lot of sympathy in the development of geothermal. Next slide, please. This shows an extract from one of the geology reports whereby a lot of the most relevant geological features around the volcano from outcrop have been analyzed, and I won't go into it, but we really had to go quite far afield, all over the volcano and even the surrounding region, to make sure we were building a very complete picture of the geological structures that could then create conduits for flow for steam to be flowing through the ground, so that we could identify the best areas to drill into that steam and produce the steam for power production. Next slide. And this shows our current conceptual model. So this was produced by Dr. Mike Schultz at TownRock, and this will continuously be evolved. This is a model based off of our current understanding and all the data that's been collected so far. It shows a magmatic source beneath the volcano. It shows large faults which become a conduit for fluid flow, and they will carry heat up towards the surface. You can see the Mamela license area highlighted in red there, which is the license which TDEC have issued to facilitate development of geothermal. But they've really given us kind of free rein to look at the whole area and not constrain us to specifically that license area. But as you can see from the diagram, I think even if you're not a geologist, you can see that license area is a pretty good location. And we're still working through a lot of data that is still going to be collected and ongoing for the next few months before a full recommendation is made for the project. Next slide. So yeah, to highlight that, there's more capacity building. On Friday, I'll be doing a workshop on financing geothermal projects and helping them navigate the next routes. Of course, them and us are very grateful to Alinea and CAA for the support for this study. There's a lot more work to go after this study before there's a meaningful amount of electricity being generated from geothermal at this site. But so far, it's looking relatively promising. What's been really useful is being able to bring the TGDC along in this journey, whereby it's not just about the technical evaluation, and it's not just about the environmental protection either, but the local communities are they need to buy into this project. They need to be engaged in the right way. And so we're really grateful to have an ethic expert also sitting within the team. Next slide, please. Yeah, so that's it. That's everything I wanted to say just now, but thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for the support for this project.
Thank you, David and Asenath, for the presentation. I think it's a really interesting initiative that showcases sort of a lot of dimensions of climate change, and also did a really good job at recognizing local context and some of the trade-offs between mitigation, adaptation, and things like biodiversity and ecosystem health. So thanks for sharing your experiences. I'll now welcome our final speaker of the day, Lisa Pfister from Samuel Hall, who I have had the pleasure of working with over the past several months. Lisa will be sharing about her team's efforts in Sierra Leone on gender-focused adaptation solutions in urban resilience. So Lisa, over to you.
Great, thanks a lot, Christy, and hello everyone. My name is Lisa Pfister. I work with Samuel Hall. We are a research organization based in Nairobi, Kenya. And yes, I'll walk you through some of the key lessons from Freetown that have come up, where we are working with Climate Resilience for All and the city of Freetown to document how gender responsive and locally led heat resilience is taking shape there, and then looking at what other African cities can learn from the lessons learned in Freetown. So if we go to the first slide, in terms of the project context, so why this project came about. We know that in Freetown, it is not just an abstract risk or something that is in the future. It is already reshaping life daily for the populations there. We see that there is a gap in temperature of up to 6 Celsius between poorer and more wealthier neighborhoods. And then when we look at projections up to 2050, we know that Freetown will experience more than 120 extremely hot days every year. Now, the people that are exposed the most to urban heat, so again, those in more poorer neighborhoods, but also women traders, youth, older persons, persons with disabilities, and also migrants who are often in those more poorer areas in the city. These are also the ones with the fewest means to adapt to urban heat. Now, if we think about that, of how urban heat is affecting different people differently, we refer to it as thermal injustice, which is a concept that we highlight in our research, but has come up from different academics across the world. And it means that heat follows the lines of inequality. It concentrates in places like markets, informal settlements, and zinc-roofed homes. Some municipalities like the Freetown Council have been on the front line in adapting and responding to these risks, but they remain chronically under-resourced. Now, despite these issues with funding, Freetown has actually emerged as a leader when it comes to climate change adaptation in urban areas, specifically urban heat. So they have piloted Africa's first chief heat officer, supported by partners like Climate Resilience for All, who are our main partner in this technical assistance. Now, if we go to the next slide for the project overview. So the contribution from us as Samuel Hall was really to try and document what are some of those lessons when it comes to gender responsive heat resilience, and how can other African cities, so across Sub-Saharan Africa in particular, who are also struggling with the same challenges of increasing urban heat, adapt to it. So we did data collection in Freetown, which was very participatory. We involved over 60 participants across key informants from the city councils, ministries, INGOs, but also health professionals. And most importantly, we spoke to women traders, youth, community-based organizations through key informant interviews, semi-structured interviews, but also focus group discussions with different participatory methods to really understand how is heat affecting their daily life, but also how are they already adapting to it? What are some of those community-based approaches? So here on the slides, you see just this was one exercise we did in the focus group discussions. And we also did heat diaries. So we actually documented women traders and how they are affected by heat over 10 days, and to kind of see what are some of those trends there. At the same time, in terms of like the outputs of this project, we also produced 4 case studies looking at specific initiatives the city has implemented. Now, the first one is the Market Shade project. Then there is the Freetown initiatives about planting trees, but also caring for them using apps and also giving compensation specifically to youth who are caring for those trees. Then we also, one case study was on the chief heat officer role, and one about youth innovations, because there are a lot of innovations coming out from youth. They are supported by various development partners. Now, along with the case studies, we've also produced a climate change profile for Freetown, which not just built on the qualitative data we have collected, but on the wealth of data the city of Freetown has already collected on climate change data and on heat, because one thing to note is that all of their interventions and their policies and action plans are based on evidence, are based on data. So we didn't collect a lot of secondary data or did spatial analysis, because that data was already there. Now we are now working on a toolkit, more of like a replication guide for other cities. And also we're doing a small benchmarking exercise to look at which other cities should be prioritized for future engagement by climate resilience. Now, in the next 2 slides, I'll talk a bit more about what we found. So if we go to the next slide, when we asked the residents of Freetown to describe heat, they didn't speak in technical terms. They used expression in their own local language, which often translated to heat has no mercy, the sun is baking us. So you could really feel that physical impact of it. People also spoke about a specific rhythm of heat that stretches from late morning to long also in the night. Specific months like March are remembered as the worst months for the heat, and the effects of urban heat affecting all areas of life. So, of course, we see things related to food spoilage in markets, but also a lot of health impact. So resident talked about hypertension, dizziness, asthma, flare-ups, skin rashes, and for women, they've also reported changes when it comes to their menstrual health and worsened cramps. A key problem is also how heat is disrupting sleep, to the point where sometimes family sleep outside despite safety concerns. And that again shows because in wealthier neighborhoods, not just is there less heat because of the greening, but they're also able to afford AC, so air conditioning. Economically, data shows that almost 90% of working hours are heat vulnerable. So that again comes to markets, informal labor, but also cultural life is affected. So events have been getting cancelled because heat is becoming unbearable. So it reminds us that heat is not only a climate risk, it's a health risk, it's an economic risk, it's a social risk. Now, if we go to the next slide, this is now about what I've mentioned before, about thermal injustice. So it is not felt the same by everyone. Women often told us about a double burden. So they spend long days selling in unshaded markets, then they go home and have to perform unpaid care work in overheated homes. So this is also related to, of course, things related to social reproductive labor, the unpaid work women do after their paid work, and it makes women especially vulnerable because they keep being in these like heat-prone environments. Then also we've looked at specifically the impacts on children, which also often face a double burden in terms of needing to help their parents in markets after school, and also struggling to concentrate in overheated classrooms. So this is also something what we heard from teachers, that they feel like the children are not able to concentrate during those very hot months. Now the other aspects related to older persons with disabilities who have limited mobility and are often exposed for longer to heat outside, specifically for people who are begging on the streets in those hot conditions. From when we look at some of the data coming from spatial mappings, we could really see specific hotspots. As I mentioned before, there are huge differences between areas within the city of Freetown. And by the way, we also see that in other cities like Nairobi and other African cities, but we don't have all the data on it. Now, I will now move forward to look at some of the case studies. So these are the impacts we see, but then, as I said before, Freetown has implemented a lot of innovative practices and has produced also great impacts to that. So if we go to the next slide, I want to focus on the role of Africa's first Chief Heat Officer, Eugenia Carbo, who is also now the Africa Heat Strategist for Climate Resilience for All. So why is her role important? Because it coordinates the different departments, so environment, health, planning, disaster risk reductions, and she's also been leading citywide campaigns such as heat mapping, SMS alerts, community awareness, so things that were not there before. Specifically, the heat mapping was a key aspect to make sure that there is a way to develop awareness campaigns. So they had awareness campaigns for improved hydration behaviors, but also rest routines, and of course the tree planting and all the other initiatives that they have implemented are coordinated by her office. It also worked because there was a strong municipal leadership by the mayor. So that's another thing that is something. It's a specific aspect why Freetown was successful is because they had that leadership from the mayor. They also used data, as I said before, all of it was based on evidence they have collected. The other important thing is the way the Chief Heat Officer, together with the other ministries and partners, developed this intervention, is that they were very cost effective and locally led. So that means they didn't need large budgets to create institutional change or to have impact on the ground, but they were able, with community-based organizations and other, to have a more cost-effective interventions. So that brings me to the next case study, which looks specifically at the Market Shade Cover project, which was one of the flagship programs, because when Freetown did these heat mappings looked at what should they focus on. They've realized that women traders are specifically affected. They spend 8 to 12 hours daily in some of the hottest areas in the cities. Now, what they did is they installed low-cost shade canopies, which were co-designed with moment traders and market association. Now, the impact for women, we spoke to, like the woman you see here on the photo, they were immediate. They reported fewer dizzy spells, fewer headaches as well. And also they were able to extend their trading hours because afternoon heat often became unbearable, so they had to stop. So that has, of course, really affected positively their incomes. Same to product spoilage, which also dropped. Now, this is something that can be replicated by other cities because it really relies on local materials and delivers immediate impacts. Though what we've also seen in terms of the lessons learned there is that when those canopies are not maintained well, the impacts, of course, fail immediately as well. So there is a need for more investment for maintenance budget. That's what we heard when speaking to traders in the market, that while the canopies are there, some of them, we also saw them, they are not maintained well. So there is need to have more funding or also explore areas where markets contribute to maintaining those canopies. Now, for the next slide, oh, sorry, I'll need to wrap up. Okay, for the next slide, it's just in terms of like some of the, when we looked at across all those different interventions, looked at what works and some of those key lessons. So I've mentioned it before, strong municipal leadership was key so that heat can become a policy priority. In most cases, heat is an invisible issue. It might be a side note when it comes to climate change, but Freetown managed to make it a priority. Community co-design was also key. So not just bringing in intervention and like top down, but it was more of a bottom up approach. Having also regional and global partnerships. So Freetown managed to get different partners involved to support on it, which also really helped them. And then they built momentum to build across Africa. So they had Africa's first urban heat summit in 2025, co-hosted with Community Resilience for All. And now the next steps is really to replicate those learnings in others. We are not saying everything is perfect there, but there are lessons that other cities can learn from that can be taken forward. My last slide was on recommendations for other African cities, but I think I will just end it for now. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Lisa. I think this is a particularly interesting initiative in that it demonstrates the value of storytelling and of talking to people about their experiences, and also that solutions don't necessarily need to be complicated to have a big impact. So really appreciate that. So we're now moving into the question and answer period of the session. So I'll just invite our panelists to turn your cameras back on. And our participants, please feel free to enter your questions into the question and answer box. And you could also use the raise a hand feature if you'd like to ask your question directly. I will kick things off with a question for Denis.
Oui.
Denis, hi, welcome back.
Hello.
Based on the project's findings, what would be some of your recommendations to Green Cape to facilitate the implementation of cluster agencies and the Alliance to ensure more long-term sustainability of the initiative?
This is important that Green Cape is a great organization. They have 50 plus people. They have a lot of expertise. Obviously, it's I would say is common sense. When you want to expand activities or create something in another region, another country, well, you have first to have some quick wins, to select 2-3 regions to validate this cluster blueprint. and context matters. So you have to identify that and grow from the experience from these regions. So secure quick wins with targeted project development as well, not only locations but also projects. So as we all know, when you have those success, when you bring people together, when you listen to people and adapt to the location, to some specification of the location, this is key. If you want to expand more, if you want to grow the group, the stakeholders, in order to achieve the main objective, which is what? Well, to have sustainable, I would say inclusive, sustainable development in Sub-Saharan Africa.
Thanks, Denis. And I think that's a common thread through all of today's presentation is the importance of understanding context and talking to each other and picking the right solution for that context. Perhaps Asenath and David, I could direct a question your way now. Are you able to share a bit about lessons from Kenya's geothermal success and how those might be applied to accelerate development in Tanzania?
Sure. I think there's a lot of technical learnings from Kenya. They've really paved the way in the region and are in many cases quite open about things that they could have done better on if they were approaching a new project. So that really helps the TGDC and other East African nations start where Kenya is, instead of learning all the same things again. I think the commercial and sort of government intervention models that Kenya have, though, are ones which are really exemplary of how you can attract sufficient funding into very large infrastructure projects. And it's that area where other East African countries, including Tanzania, have not cracked it yet, and could really learn a lot more from Kenya.
Thank you very much for that, David. Lisa, I would like to ask you what some of the key recommendations you would have based on your work would be, since you didn't get a chance to talk about it in your presentation.
Great. Thank you. Some of the key recommendations when it comes to funding, it was investing in locally led adaptation, having more flexible multi-year financing for municipalities that can actually lead their adoption. So rather than creating parallel system on it. Other ones were related to what I'm just seeing what I didn't say yet. To link some of the immediate relief, like we saw with the market shade canopy, to also long-term resilience. So for long-term resilience, looking into tree planting, but also then drainage, waste management, school design, public health services. So what infrastructure and architecture are we building that is actually more urban heat resilience? And then lastly, also putting gender equity at the heart of heat action. So designing around lived realities of women and also other groups in more vulnerable situations, so we can make sure that resilience is more inclusive and not doesn't exclude people who are already affected the most. Maybe one last thing.
Yeah, of course.
Maybe one last thing on data and like additional research that is needed is some of the health impacts on not just urban heat and heat in general, on women's health, menstruation, like reproductive health has not been fully covered yet. Also, long-term impacts of heat is something where we are still missing some like data points there. So there needs to be some investment as well in more longitudinal data collection to understand that.
Thank you, Lisa. All really, really useful insights, I think, for all of us. And I think your piece around sort of combining short-term solutions with longer-term adaptation options is really important, and also speaks to the value of having conversations around heat and adaptation embedded within a municipality who can make a lot of these decisions in the long term. So thank you for that. I'll maybe just open the floor for a moment to Asenath or Gareth, if you would like to share anything more about your experiences with Climate Action Africa or any takeaways from the presentation so far.
Thank you very much indeed. I found the presentations very interesting, a really good range of initiatives moving forward. I think the heat issue is something that's, increasingly aware. I attended another event and the quote, the thing that I came away with was that one of the ladies they interviewed said, the sun is never hotter than my children's hunger. And it was to hear those conditions 6 degrees warmer is such a difference. So I think there's some real issues to address around there, and very interested to still see investment going on and work around geothermal, because it's so important. Kenya has such a head start now because in the past they invested in geothermal, and they're benefiting from that. 40% of their energy coming from a renewable baseload source. And if we'd had the foresight to do that 20 years ago, we'd be benefiting from it now. So I'm really glad to see that that the CAA is supporting those activities. And the cluster-based work, I think everything that we can do to help micro, small and medium enterprises. There are apparently 44 million micro, small and medium enterprises in Sub-Saharan Africa. So no amount of support is enough to help them access climate finance. And then maybe I can just say a quick word about one of the benefits, one of the projects in fact, we've had two at the African Development Bank. We've benefited from two CAA projects. One has been around the formation of green banks, which are national financing institutions that we hope will be able to mobilize money from a range of different sources to offer blended finance for Paris-aligned or green investment opportunities. We're close to raising money now in Benin with Caisse des Dépôts et Consignements, and we're also working with Banque Investissement National in Côte d'Ivoire. And last year, 2 years ago, we raised $50 million from the Green Climate Fund for the Rwanda Green Investment Facility. So a lot of interesting work going there. And then we're also working with CAA and partners to develop a methodology for mangrove restoration in São Tomé and Príncipe under the adaptation benefits mechanism. And that work will be concluding. I think it's been extended actually until March. We got a 3 months extension to help us get to the final line. But really very, we appreciate the diversity of support that we see coming through Climate Action Africa. And also just speaking in my role as a member of the Permanent Steering Committee member, we see, great progress towards implementing the rest of the outstanding contracts and moving the project towards completion. So congratulations on that. Thank you, Kirsty. Let me hand it back to you.
Thank you, Gareth, both for your participation today and for your efforts overall to support this program and in general in your career to support finding funding for these important initiatives. And Asenath, is there anything you would like to add at this point, or else we could move to the question and answer box?
No, nothing at the moment.
Awesome,
Please.
thank you. Okay, great. So we did have one question in, that one's answered. I see one question in the chat box, which I'll move to first, and then I'll go over to the Q&A box, and please do add more questions in as they come to mind. So I have a question here for the Tanzania project. How will this project concretely contribute to strengthening TGDC's technical capacities and exploration activities? What are the next steps planned for the implementation of the project? And will TGDC have the necessary expertise to secure the financing required for drilling activities?
There's a lot of questions in there. So first, how is their capacity being built through the project? Well, each of the technical aspects of the project is being delivered with a comprehensive workshop around it to make sure that any concepts that we're applying in the technical approach are being disseminated to them so that they would be able to apply that to their other projects. There's also been a soft audit across their equipment and recommendations made on repairs or replacement or improvements to their equipment, especially in the area of geophysics. There's been a lot of recommendations around ESIA requirements, especially with regards what is required from a funder. Different funders have different requirements, and national versus global standards are different. So just helping piece together the differences between those and the standards that they should be aspiring for. I think the most gratifying training has been in the field. Really, the training, every day for several weeks of very keen and motivated Tanzanians. So they are so much more equipped with certain field techniques than they were when we got there. Then with regards to securing financing, so the TGDC have secured funding for their flagship geothermal project in the south. They are in the process of now doing exploratory drilling at their first project. That's been funded by the Geothermal Risk Mitigation Fund. They have a second project that's also been offered funding from that source. And until I think they've matured those projects, that source probably won't fund other projects. So they're looking at all the ways that other sources of funding could be brought in for the next phases at Meru and the other prospects. I don't know if they have full clarity on those sources of funding. And that's something we want to help them with through further training and offering, financial modeling, and also laying out all the options for them so that they can help, decide with our help which ones are worth going for. But I think it's fair to say that us and TGDC would be very interested to speak to any interested funders who are looking for geothermal assets to add to their portfolio.
Thank you, David, for tackling that three-parter.
Actually, I did two parts. Was there a third part?
Oh,
that's okay.
I think we're good. Yeah, thank you for that. Eric Nimubona, you had your hand up. I'm not sure if it's still up, but would you like to ask a question?
Oui, merci beaucoup. Je voulais poser une question à propos de la présentation sur la Tanzanie. C'est vraiment une bonne chose de réfléchir sur des énergies renouvelables. Je voulais savoir quel est le niveau d'implication des autorités étatiques au haut niveau en Tanzanie pour la réussite de ce programme, parce qu'en fait, on assiste le plus souvent en Afrique à beaucoup d'études, mais qui se font, mais où la mise en application ou bien la priorisation par les États ne suit pas immédiatement comme on le voit dans les pays développés. J'aimerais savoir, à votre niveau, le degré de priorisation ou bien d'engagement des autorités étatiques pour la réussite, le financement, avant de recourir à des financements extérieurs, mais savoir si le pays en soi est engagé à financer, ne fût-ce que les premiers investissements. Merci.
Thank you, Eric. Could I ask David, or do you want to speak to that one as well? You're in the hot seat.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I only heard the French version of that, and my French was not good enough to get that question.
No problem. It looks maybe your translation isn't on.
So I believe the question goes directly to the engagement of state authorities in terms of what's their level of buy-in, engagement, participation, and how they are advancing their own policy programs and activities based on what we are implementing there. David.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I got that. So, I mean, It sounds like there's a couple interested attendees that want to come to my finance workshop on Friday because there's going to be quite a lot around all the options here, and there is not a sort of proven best way to approach this yet. But so what Kenya did with the GDC, the Geothermal Development Company in Kenya, was that they took on a lot of the early stage exploration risk through government funding. So the Kenyan government were able to drill initial exploration wells and do a lot of the exploratory work leading up to that point as well to prove the resource. When the resource has been proven through exploration drilling and there's high confidence in the generating capacities that you can achieve from a power plant built to that site, then there's a whole array of funding that's available to do the rest. And generally just the final piece of the puzzle will be securing a long-term appropriate power purchase agreement. So the role of the state in the Kenyan model is very hands-on. I think the role of the state has to be with regards to protecting the local communities and the environment and making sure that there's transparency in the funding that's going in and the ownership and operation of the asset. But I think where you have quite a hands-off approach, there are not very many geothermal projects being developed that quickly in these earlier less developed markets. So I would recommend the hands-on approach, and GDC I think had a good model for that, which TGDC I think in their name alone is looking to replicate in some way.
Thanks, David. We have another hand up in the audience, Sergio Silva Borges. Do you have a question? And Gabrielle, I think you can unmute. I'll just give it one moment to see if we can unmute our speaker. Perhaps I'll just move to, there's one question in the Q&A box, and then we can come back to the raised hand. I have a question from Helen, which is regarding construction of transmission lines.
Sorry, Kirsty. I think Helen actually was trying to answer another question that was in a different
section. Thank you.
Where Yannick asked as a follow-up to his other question about the cost of building transmission lines.
I see.
I think Helen's is more of an answer there, and it depends on the PPA structure. And yeah, so sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Awesome. Thank you for clarifying there. Appreciate it. Sergio, you are able to unmute your own mic if you still wish to ask a question. I'm being told. All right. We're just about at time anyway. I'll give one more moment if anybody wants to unmute and ask a question, or if any of our panelists have any final remarks that they were hoping to get to and we haven't. But otherwise, we'll start to move into closing the session with about 10 minutes remaining. Okay, I think we're going to wrap it up. So as we wrap up, I'd like to thank all of today's speakers, including Elise Perret from WSP and Gareth Phillips from the African Development Bank. Also, thank you to Global Affairs Canada for funding this important initiative. I'd also like to, again, thank Denis, Asenath, David, and Lisa for your thoughtful presentations. And of course, I'd like to extend a big thank you to all of our participants for taking the time to join us today. We hope you'll stay online for a couple more minutes as we close out today's session with some final notes and remarks. I'd like to remind you that the recording from today's session will be available on Climate Action Africa's website. Further, today's session was the second in a series of webinars to showcase the work of Climate Action Africa. The next session will be on February 4th, 2026. And please also note the updated date for the Women's Leadership session, which will occur in March, aligned with International Women's Day. Finally, when you leave the session, you'll see a survey pop up, and we hope you'll take the time to complete the brief feedback survey before you leave. And with that, I'd like to invite Marco Heredia to share closing remarks on behalf of Alinea. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me well?
Yes, better than before.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, two things. First, I'd like to reproduce the speech notes from one of our colleagues, our project team lead in GAC, who I've seen in the participants, but unfortunately, due to technical issues, cannot participate directly as a panelist. So I'm going to read the remarks that he had prepared for this session. So on behalf of Global Affairs Canada and the Pan-African Regional Development Program, he's very pleased to welcome you all to the second session of Climate Action Africa webinar series on strengthening climate mitigation and adaptation. He would like to remind us that this series provides a valuable opportunity to share lessons, experiences from across the continent, and how inclusive, transparent, and gender-responsive mitigation and adaptation can drive stronger climate resilience. Canada is proud to support the Climate Action Africa initiative implemented by Alinea International, Econoler and WSP, which is helping governments, civil society, and the private sector work together to plan and implement effective climate solutions. Les exemples que nous avons entendus aujourd'hui démontrent l'importance du leadership local et de la coopération pour rendre l'action climatique plus inclusive et plus efficace. Je tiens à remercier nos éminents intervenants de l'équipe d'action climatique en Afrique pour leur engagement à faire progresser la gouvernance climatique sur le continent. Merci à tous et je vous souhaite un excellent webinaire. Donc, avec ça, I would like to finally provide you with some insights and some reflections about today's webinar. And on behalf of Alinea International, I would like to sincerely thank you, all of you today. Speakers, partners, participants. I see a lot of our colleagues, including us, obviously, and first and foremost, our colleagues, project advisors that have been participating. Rana in the renewable energy, Rana Alkindi from Econoler, of course. Christy, you are working with WSP, and we at Alinea International are really proud and excited to hear all this really good examples of mitigation adaptations in Sub-Saharan Africa with such a rich and inspiring exchange. We have learned today very clearly that Climate Action Africa is already happening and it's already, providing some results, and that's being led by African institutions, communities, and innovators, as you have seen today, with targeted support from partners. From the mitigation side, we saw Denis Leclerc, who reminded us that climate solutions are also development solutions. We saw how the Cleantech cluster and alliance work led with partners like Green Cape can structure ecosystems that can accelerate innovation, strengthen SMEs' roles, and help African entrepreneurs scale climate technologies in a way that supports jobs, inclusions, and resilience. We saw the extraordinary presentation from the team working in the Meru Geothermal Prospect Project with really exciting photographs. I just can't imagine how exciting it must be working there in the field. And congratulations of that. This is a great initiative that is showing already very good results in the detailed surface exploration studies, geological and geophysical analysis, most importantly, capacity building for local experts. And we know there's some activity going on at this stage with TGDC, who has been a very engaged partner. Du côté de l'adaptation, les sophistes et l'équipe de Samuel nous ont rappelé de manière cessante que les changements climatiques ne sont pas neutres du point de vue de genre, et que les chaleurs urbaines transforment déjà le quotidien de millions de personnes. Africain, la chaleur extrême n'est pas seulement un risque climatique, c'est aussi un enjeu social, économique et de justice. Les femmes commerçantes sur le marché, les jeunes, les migrants, les personnes en situation d'handicap sont touchées de manière disproportionnée. On a vu la création de toute première Chief Heat Officer en Afrique, le projet de couverture ombragée de marchés conçus avec les communautés ainsi que la cartographie communautaire de chaleur qui transforme le savoir local en action concrète. Ces initiatives démontrent comme une adaptation sensible en genre, portée localement peut être à la fois efficace et reproductible dans les villes africaines. Ce qui relie l'ensemble des présentations d'aujourd'hui, c'est un message commun. L'action climatique est plus efficace lorsqu'elle est portée localement, inclusive et fondée sur des partenariats solides. Yes, what links today's presentation is this shared message. Climate action works best when it's locally led, inclusive, and rooted in strong partnerships. So this is at the heart of the expert deployment mechanism, climate action in Africa. Together with our partners, WSP and Econoler, and with the support of Global Affairs Canada, we are proud to support African institutions, governments, and civil society to accelerate both mitigation and adaptation efforts across the continent. Thank you very much to all of our speakers, Elise Paré, Gareth Phillips, and Global Affairs Canada. To our participants, thank you for your engagement, your questions, and your commitment. We hope this session has been useful and inspiring. And as a reminder, as had been already said, our next webinar will take place on February 4th. On the new year. And please note that the women's leadership session has been moved to March. So before you leave, kindly please complete the short feedback survey that we have for you, and that will help us to strengthen our future sessions. Merci à tous et à tous pour votre présence aujourd'hui. We look forward to continuing this journey with you through Climate Action Africa. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you very much, Marco. Have a good one.